Hello, Ilana. Thank you so much for coming back again. I know students and we all appreciate your insights. Thanks for making time to return. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about poetic form. We're concluding our discussion of sonnets and then turning our attention to the villanelle. Later on we'll be talking about sestinas. But Ilana, you're joining us to talk about sestinas and, villanelles. And you're someone who's written both villanelles, very difficult, sophisticated form, and a great many sonnets. Before we take a look at Elizabeth Bishop's One Art, tell us a little bit about why constrain yourself as a poet to the form of something that seems like just a headache, such as the sonnet or a villanelle.
Well, you constrain yourself so as to create a thing of beauty. It's the same thing, if someone gives you, 100 scraps of colorful paper and tells you, make a chain out of it. You might make a pattern because the pattern would look more beautiful than just randomly, putting those strips of paper together. So, right, you create constraints so as to make a thing of beauty. I think that's one of the reasons. And also there are aspects of the form that speak to the content of the poem. So, if you want to, a sonnet is very good when there's a sudden turn. Shakespearean sonnet was real when there's a turn, an emotional turn at the end. You want to show the drama of that turn. You choose a form that enables you to demonstrate that. The poem that we're looking at today, the villanelle, is sort of like a dance form. There are recurrent lines that dance through the poem, almost like, you're looking at a video of people dancing in circles very fast, and you're trying to make heads or tails of what you're seeing on the screen. So you pick one woman who's wearing a particularly bright skirt, and you just follow her as she whirls around the dance floor, right, every time, and then you can sort of get a sense of the dance by keeping your eye on that woman in the red skirt. That's sort of what happens with a villanelle, right? You have a line that runs through the whole poem and comes back again and again and again, but in different places. And it's almost like you try to keep track of where has that line gone, like you're following that dancer. But in this case, the line that you don't want to lose track of or you want to keep track of is a line about loss. Okay, and the poem is entirely about, itself is a poem about, I just thought that now. The poem itself is a poem about losing. It's a very ironic poem. The author, when the poem begins with the author saying this recurrent line, the art of losing isn't hard to master, okay, which already raises a whole bunch of questions. Losing, right? Losing things, okay? The art of losing. Since when is losing an art form, right? I understand that making paper chains, that may be an art form, but losing things and an art form that we might want to master, we want to get good at losing things, is that really what she's talking about? Maybe not. Maybe she means something else. Let's try to see. So many things seemed filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster, right? It's as if so many things in the world just want to get lost. So when they get lost, right, it almost feels like it's not even such a big deal. They wanted to get lost anyway. Well, what is she talking about? What are these things in the world? First of all, what she's ascribing intentionality to presumably inanimate objects, right? The kinds of things we lose, right? And then she gives you examples. Lose something every day. Every day you can lose something. Except the fluster, right? Except how frustrating it is of lost door keys, right? You're lost out of your apartment. The hour badly spent. Oh, just lost an hour. The art of losing isn't hard to master, right? She says, it's very easy to lose these things, to lose track of an hour, to lose your keys, right? It's don't worry, you can do this, as if she's giving us an instruction manual on how to lose, right? There's something very ironic about this. Who would want to learn how to lose something? And yet everything she's described so far as things we might lose are very basic things, right? Your keys. Everyone's lost their keys. An hour. Everyone wastes an hour. Should I keep going?
So let's just take a second now, because we have heard the poem read for us.
Oh,
the poem is one that, yes, personifies, ascribes intentionality and some droll or comic form of anthropomorphism to these everyday objects, at least at the beginning of this litany of items to be lost. You began by contrasting the tone of the poem, its sarcasm, its witty, almost joking, the jocular tone, the joking gesture that we hear at the end, that is the tone of the poem, and certainly not its content. That its content is
much more
contrast.
serious. Yeah.
So
well, we're going to get to that, okay?
Well, is there something about this sort of villanelle that you said? Let's talk a bit more about the form, and then maybe we could talk more about. And then we will address some of these specific lines and moments that bring us up short as we read it. But is there something about the villanelle that's almost lighthearted? That is there? Would you say that? Because we'll also be talking about do not go gentle villanelle. But you said it's villanelle's like even the term of it comes from a village, a town dance almost. This French form with those recurring 2 lines in this poem, at least, Bishop's villanelle. The art of losing isn't hard to master, and then to do it is no disaster.
Right.
That feminine rhyme of the aster and aster, and there's something very light and simple about it, but underneath is something much, much darker.
Right. I mean, look, it's playful in the sense that there are only, with one exception, there are only 2 rhymes throughout the entire poem, right? Except for gesture, right? There are only 2 rhymes. There's the ench rhyme and the aster rhyme, as you said, right? Every word in this poem, every end word in this poem rhymes with one of those 2 words. So she's very, very constrained in what she's doing, and yet she's very creative in the way she's able to come up with those rhymes, and also to even so I would say that. I think she's choosing this form because of the playful possibilities which contrast with the very somber tone of what she's talking about.
Not the tone, it's the concept. The tone remains sarcastic and funny through the end. That losing keys, no big deal. Losing an hour here and there, not a big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. Practice losing things. You can get good at it. Like it's almost like if someone says...
It goes along with the one art. The joke about that this isn't... That there is an art of losing. I'm so good at losing things. I'm a master.
It's like if someone comes to you and says, did you wash these dishes? They don't look clean at all. They look terrible. I think I need to do them all again. And you would say to that person, oh, washing dishes poorly? That's my talent. I'm an expert. Want me to do a few more? I'm so good at washing dishes poorly. Let me show you. Look, I can leave a brown spot there. Here, I'll leave a little oil stain. I'm very good. The art of washing dishes poorly is hard to master, but I'm good at it, right? That's the tone, right? Who wants to be good at something like that?
Something that she doesn't want to be good at, and something that... it's something both that you don't ever want to master, but it's not that she says that I am not an expert at this. In fact, she proclaims that she is an expert.
She is an expert. She is an expert. She's an expert at losing. She's mastered the art of losing. On the other hand, right, as we'll see by the end of the poem, right, maybe there is something to be said for mastering the art of losing that has value more so than mastering the art of poorly washing dishes, say. Okay.
Well, she goes through the whole litany, and it becomes more grandiose. The hyperbole becomes almost comic. Losing a continent, losing a country.
Right. If you make a list of all the things that are lost, which is a useful exercise in analyzing this poem, you'll see that the things she loses become increasingly more significant, right? And more weighty, each loss. Okay, so should we do that?
Until she gets to the final loss. The quatrain that concludes the poem after this series of the terse sets, 3-line stanzas that make up most of the villanelle. In those final lines, she says, even losing you, the joking gesture, the voice.
And nothing is a disaster, right? She's always saying all along, right? The disaster is always prefaced by a negative, right? It's no disaster, right? None of these will bring disaster. It wasn't a disaster, right? She constantly is assuring us it wasn't a disaster. There's sort of like this repression, right? There is a disaster. The heart of this poem is a disaster. But she doesn't want to say that. She doesn't want to face that. To face that would be to acknowledge the enormity of her loss. So instead of doing that, she says to us, oh, it's no big deal. Oh, it's no disaster. Oh, it's no disaster, right?
So read us the last quatrain. How does it...
Want me to go in order?
I think it's fine. Well, unless there are specific things we want to talk about. But my question is, how does the poem make it clear that this really is a disaster, despite professing throughout, perhaps ironically, that it is no disaster?
Look, I would say one thing, that until the 4th stanza, you could kind of believe her. Like, she hasn't totally strained her credibility yet, right? I understand, okay, you lost your door keys, and you don't seem to mind that. Okay, Elizabeth Bishop, and your hour, I get that. Okay, you're getting good at losing things. I don't know why you want to do that, but okay. And you lost your mother's watch. Oh, that's a shame. And then, what? My last of 3 loved houses? That doesn't make any sense. who loses a house, right? How can you lose 3 houses, right? Your last one, like, and you start to really raise your eyebrows, like, wait a second,
what is she
something
talking
else
about?
is going on here. Is she making a joke? Is she being sarcastic with it? Like, what exactly is she telling us?
The hyperbole raises it to the level of the figural, to the symbolic.
Right. And then you realize, oh, this is all really symbolic. Her mother's watch.
Go.
What does she mean by her mother's watch? Maybe she doesn't mean wristwatch, or maybe not only wristwatch. Maybe she means that her mother can no longer watch her.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she's lost her mother. Is it possible she lost her mother? And then you
the watching over, the observance of the care of her mother.
Right, the double
mother's
meaning of watch.
Watching, yeah.
Right.
That there might be, and even the one art we start to see as something quite different.
Right. This is not one art among many. This is like the ultimate art.
Art, yeah.
The art, right.
Which we also we wish to connect after we discuss that final stanza to the art of poetry. That there was something about the art of this poem and the art of loss and grief that it is describing.
And that the poet is mastering in writing this poem. Okay, so I'll read the end. This is the last stanza. Even losing you. Okay, we're like, wait a second, you. Okay, so she's addressing someone. Yeah. She's talking to someone she's lost. Yeah. And she's speaking about something she's lost, but in a direct second-person address, as if that thing is standing before her, even losing you, which is very paradoxical. How do you address something you have lost, right? Mm-hmm. Even losing you, and what does she mean by you? And she almost can't face what that is, so she puts it in parentheses, or who it is, yeah. The joking voice, a gesture I love. A person. She's lost a person. I shan't have lied. It's evident. It's clear. The art of losing's not too hard to master. Notice now she's already qualifying it. It may be hard to master, but it's not too hard, right? She can't dare to say it's not hard to master at this point because she's talking about losing someone she loves. Though it may look like, like disaster, right? She's telling herself it may look like disaster. It is a disaster, right? But she's pushing herself through the writing of this poem towards healing. She's trying to heal herself from her grief. She's trying to console herself from her grief by writing her way towards healing, by belittling the enormity of the loss in an attempt perhaps to convince herself that she can get over this. She can master this art. She can become an expert at losing, and then maybe it won't be quite as devastating as it feels right now. And in so doing, acknowledges how insuperable, how impossible it is, how enormous it is to sustain these losses. Right. Convince the persuasion of herself fails. In a way, fails. Right. It fails. It fails. Because that last quatrain, that last stanza reveals that it really has been an address. The apostrophe to the absent, lost loved one, who's no longer there, as well as she makes clear, write it. To whom is that write it addressed? Herself, I think. I think she's telling herself, you can do this, Elizabeth Bishop. You can do this. This is so painful to acknowledge that you've lost this person who means so much to you, but write it on paper, get it on paper, and you'll start, maybe you'll start to master that art of losing. That it has been. Write it like disaster. Why put it in parentheses there? That because it's sort of like, because it's like, oh, come on. It's like she's saying it under her breath. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. Like it's like if someone asks you, how are you? You say, I'm fine. Just say it. I'm fine. You can do it. I'm really fine. Right? There's that sort of tone of like the things you say under your breath to yourself. So the sincere tone, the authentic tone is put there into parentheses where everything else maintains that kind of smiley disposition, that jokey tone. Right. The poem has repeated through the villanelle form this idea of, we'll talk about the mastery of art and the mastery of form in a moment, but the disaster, and it concludes on that tone of write it, the disaster. And if anything, this poem has written disaster all over it. Yeah. How does it change then in that final stanza? We've said it a little bit about it, that how trying to deny disaster really only confesses how huge it is. The many disasters that the speaker seems to have. I mean, if she had really mastered the art of losing, she wouldn't have had to write this poem, you could say, right? Because the poem is writing her way through her grief. Had she already mastered it, had she already gotten over the loss of this loved one, her mother, whoever it is, right? Maybe it's her mother, maybe it's someone else. Had she ever gotten over this loss, had she already gotten over this loss, then there would be no need for the poem, right? The mastery of the poem is her own self-mastery.
Well, that's what I want to end with. The idea of mastering loss almost seems self-defeating. To master loss is to deny our vulnerability, to claim that we don't lose. And of course, the poet here is saying, yes, these are huge losses. There is pain that the speaker has suffered in seeming and apparently a lifetime of loss. What is that art? What is that mastery?
Well, there's also, the art is also artifice, we could say, right?
What do you mean by that?
Because art doesn't just mean the crafting of a thing of beauty. Art is also deceit, or it's artifice. It's right, it's the same root, right? It's anything that we are, it's being artful in the sense of being deceptive, right? She
creating something other than that which is given, creating something different than the natural state.
Yeah, and also deceiving yourself, tricking yourself, being artful. That's what she's doing in the poem. She's trying to trick herself into thinking that she can master, that she's unaffected by this loss.
Like an artful dodger here.
Like an artful dodger, right? Exactly. She's
What
trying to dodge her loss. Yeah.
And then I suggest that there's some kind of similarity or affinity or a contrast maybe even between the one art of writing and the art that she professes to be mastering.
Right, well, the art of writing is the art of memorializing. It's the art of retaining. It's the art of holding on. Why do you write? You write to preserve. You write because, if you don't write something, it disappears. You forget it, right? You write to remember. You write to preserve, and to write about loss is to try to hold on to that loss, even as it's slipping away from you.
So the art here, which is masterfully demonstrated in this extraordinary villanelle that, to try to tie a few things together, comes across, at least initially, as a very natural communication, but is highly stylized, very intricately constructed with that repeating refrain of master, disaster, and how it all comes together in the end. The artifice of it is so supremely done that it almost appears to be
I shan't have lied. You've lied throughout the whole poem, right?
And the honesty of the poem supersedes the artifice, the line, the subterfuge of its tone.
Yeah.
And all of that is an extraordinary feat of composition, of poetry. The art of language here conveys this very profound art that is never mastered in the sense of it being overcome, but it is one that is somehow learned. There is a lesson here that is about art of mastering, of learning, of trying to live. I don't have really a question here, but what would you say about this in conclusion, about how all these threads, all these strands come together in this extraordinary piece of art, of writing?
Well, she lost someone very dear to her, but she gained...
And many people. I mean, biographically, Elizabeth Bishop, we haven't spoken about Bishop's own biography, but this can be read as a very autobiographical poem indeed, after a lifetime of losing so many people. But we don't even need to go there, so let's just talk about the text itself. But this is clearly written by someone who has lost, who has suffered loss of the most important loss of people.
And who realizes that you never get used to losing. I think that's the message of the poem, that no matter how hard you may try to train yourself to say like, oh yeah, so-and-so, I lost so-and-so, but that's okay. This is the fourth person I loved in my life to lose. Like, this is old hat for me by now. I'm very good at this. That's not how we human beings are built. That's not how we function, right? Every loss hits us smack in the stomach, right? With that full force of the enormity of our grief. It never gets easier to lose. If anything, it gets harder because we're overcome by the traumas of all our past loss, which reverberate with each subsequent loss. So it doesn't get easier. And maybe the only thing that might make it in any way, I don't even want to say easier, but perhaps that much more bearable, is to write about it. And that's the lesson the poet has learned. And that's what poetry does, right? It's a way of processing the trauma of loss, and in so doing, creating something that will endure, that we can hold on to.
And so to make master and disaster rhyme, to make the mastery of loss. That's beautifully
To
put.
master the disaster.
To master the disaster of life and to turn it into something both beautiful, moving, and at
Enduring.
once funny and very sad. Okay, thank you, Nora.